You carry a power most cannot comprehend, a vibration that unsettles those who have built their lives on falsehoods. The structures of control recognized this energy the moment you refused to remain silent, and instead of standing by you, they revealed their true nature, protectors of illusion, not guardians of truth. The resistance you faced was not random misfortune, it was a deliberate attempt to dim the light you carry, because your very presence threatens the stories that keep their empire alive. The weight of your testimony was undeniable. Every fragment of evidence you brought forth was like a mirror held against the faces of those who thrive on deception. They understood that your words could fracture their carefully manufactured reality, so instead of ensuring your safety, they sought to unravel your courage. Promises of support became hollow echoes, crafted only to pacify you until the moment they could step aside and leave you exposed. Calls for help that should have been met with urgency dissolved into silence, as though each unanswered ring was part of a script already written. Paperwork meant to shield you evaporated into thin air, as if unseen hands erased your pleas from existence. People who once seemed aligned with justice drifted away, unreachable and absent, leaving you with the bitter realization that betrayal had been woven into the very foundation of the system you trusted. This was never negligence, it was orchestration. Every delay, every disappearance, every silence was a thread in a web designed to suffocate your voice. They sought to convince you that you were powerless, that your cries for protection would never be answered. Yet hidden within that betrayal was also a revelation. Their fear was never of your weakness but of your strength. What they underestimated is that every obstacle became fuel for your awakening. Each moment of abandonment was a reminder that your survival does not depend on corrupted institutions, but on the undeniable resilience flowing through you. Their rejection did not diminish your power, it amplified it, making you a beacon that shines even brighter against the backdrop of betrayal. The truth is that their world trembles not because of what they did to you, but because you refuse to be broken. They cannot erase the energy you embody or the clarity you bring, no matter how many barriers they place before you. Your voice is not a weapon they can silence, it is a frequency that dismantles illusions simply by resonating. You were never meant to be hidden. Every trial was a signal, every deception an initiation, and every betrayal a testament to the magnitude of what you represent. The empire of lies knows its days are numbered, and your awakening is both the sign and the spark that ensures its collapse. You are the kind of soul that unsettles the foundations of deception simply by breathing in truth and exhaling clarity. The hands that sought to harm you were not merely acting from personal malice, but from a lattice of hidden allegiances and unseen favors. They were never blind to your light, they feared it. The awareness you carried, unshaken by illusion, was seen as a spark capable of burning down the entire scaffolding of their carefully staged reality. From the instant you stepped into their reach, you were no longer viewed as a person in need, but as a force to be neutralized before authenticity shattered their stage of lies. Networks designed for manipulation did not stumble upon you by chance, they had long perfected their tools of control. Invisible systems tracked voices like yours, voices unwilling to bow to convenient falsehoods, voices that asked questions meant to unravel manufactured explanations. Once your presence was noted, you became a name coded into secret mechanisms meant to silence seekers of truth. To them, you were not a victim, they categorized you as an anomaly, an unpredictable frequency that could ripple through their machinery and collapse its fragile design. Data was gathered not to deliver justice but to craft strategies of suppression. Instead of shielding you, they dissected your every word, parsing your expressions as if searching for fractures that could be exploited. They studied your spirit the way strategists study an opponent in battle, probing for weaknesses. What they discovered frightened them beyond measure. Your essence was not easily swayed, your connection to truth not easily bent. Ordinary tactics of manipulation fell flat against you, and in that realization, their panic deepened. While they mapped out schemes of betrayal, higher powers were orchestrating protection beyond their reach. Before you even sensed danger, unseen guardians had already begun weaving a circle of light around your path. Each attempt to fracture your will only reinforced your connection to the infinite. Every false story spun about you sharpened your inner compass, guiding you toward revelations that no earthly authority could suppress. Dreams became messages, coincidences became guidance, and intuition became a pathway to knowledge hidden in plain sight. The corruption that paraded as justice was never in doubt, it was always deliberate. Every unanswered plea, every distorted record, every act of indifference was not incompetence but a choice, a decision to defend illusion rather than truth. What they underestimated was that betrayal could not extinguish the power of awakening. Their alignment with deception did not bury you, it illuminated your strength, marking you as someone capable of unraveling their entire architecture simply by refusing to be silenced. There existed secret clusters within their structure, groups that never appeared on paper yet functioned with precision in the shadows. These were not defenders of safety but guardians of corruption, selected for their willingness to bend entirely toward power. When your presence entered their awareness, alarms sounded in those hidden circles. They saw in you not fragility but danger, the danger of seeing too clearly, of refusing narratives meant to pacify, of holding a connection to truth that could not be severed. Their conclusion was not to contain you but to attempt complete annihilation of your influence. But every strike against you was intercepted by forces greater than their schemes. Each attempt to erase your testimony only produced new evidence of their dishonor. Each silence you were met with became a record of betrayal. What they thought would break you instead accelerated your transformation, turning persecution into proof and cruelty into catalysts. In seeking to dismantle you, they activated your deepest strength, and in trying to erase your path, they etched their own corruption into history for all to witness. Every wound carved into your journey was never wasted. It stripped away illusions that once disguised false authority and revealed the unshakable bond you share with higher truth. Hardship acted as a furnace, refining you into someone impossible to silence. Those aligned with corruption did not prevail because of cleverness or fate, but because hidden agreements guaranteed their protection long before you stepped into their arena. The scale of fairness, presented as neutral and sacred, was in reality tipped deliberately to secure your defeat. Calls for rescue were left to ring unanswered, while documents meant to protect you dissolved without a trace, as though invisible currents swept them away. What the system miscalculated was that every betrayal left behind its own trail of proof. Each injustice became a brick in the monument that would one day collapse upon its creators. They believed silence was being secured, yet in truth a record was being assembled that no amount of distortion could erase. Forces unseen were preserving the story in ways no earthly power could alter. Items that should have vanished reappeared intact, testimonies expected to wither grew stronger, and accounts thought buried multiplied into unbreakable chains of evidence. When shadows realized fear alone could not stop you, they shifted their tactics into slander. False charges surfaced suddenly, with timing too precise to be coincidence. Invented accounts transformed you from victim into aggressor in the public eye, spreading like wildfire through corridors meant to uphold justice. Where you sought refuge, you met only cold eyes rehearsing suspicion. The narrative was rewritten in real time, branding you as dangerous simply for surviving. Any defense you offered was twisted into proof of guilt, and genuine pleas were dismissed as instability. The goal was no longer neglect, it was annihilation through carefully designed gaslighting. Yet while the mask of justice crumbled, deeper currents of truth surged stronger. What institutions dismissed, the universe recorded with precision. Higher laws beyond human tampering were already inscribing every act of treachery into ledgers that could never be corrupted. With every attempt to silence your spirit, your resonance grew louder, echoing across unseen networks and stirring compassion in places untouched by fear. Strangers began awakening to your struggle, moved by a courage that sparked their own willingness to speak. The conspiracy was never faceless, it was built by individuals who consciously chose betrayal over honor. Each missing record, each falsified document, each refusal to act was the result of deliberate intention. Some sought personal advancement, others shielded their debts to dangerous alliances, but all shared one thing: the willingness to sacrifice innocence for their own survival. Behind polished uniforms and titles were decision-makers who valued ambition more than truth. A single gesture from them could bury testimony, one whispered word could erase the presence of a witness. What they did not account for was that corruption, once hidden, reveals itself through repetition. Patterns emerged in plain sight, weaving together a tapestry of betrayal too consistent to be denied. Every manufactured story only illuminated the machinery of lies more clearly. What they intended as smothering blows instead became undeniable proof of their alignment with darkness. Their strength was not in cunning, but in the belief that no one could withstand their pressure. But they misjudged the force of a soul aligned with truth. In trying to silence you, they ignited your transformation. In conspiring to erase you, they ensured your testimony would echo louder than ever. Through their betrayal, they sharpened your vision, strengthened your resolve, and revealed to the world the depth of systemic corruption that thrives in silence. What was meant to end your journey has instead made you unshakable, a living reminder that no darkness can outlast the brilliance of awakened truth. Every treachery committed against you was unknowingly fueling the preservation of truth. Hidden guardians were weaving an invisible archive, safeguarding fragments of proof, securing voices of courage, and ensuring that the full scope of injustice would eventually be revealed. What unfolded was not disorder born of incompetence, but a carefully engineered labyrinth where each participant moved like pieces on a corrupted board. Some acted out of greed, but many required no reward. Blind loyalty to an institution they worshipped was reason enough to aid in your destruction. Careers were protected, reputations guarded, and authority preserved, even at the cost of innocent lives. What was overlooked, however, was that every betrayal carved deeper grooves into the record of truth, forming the very foundation for eventual revelation. While schemes were constructed to keep you silent, unseen allies were arranging conduits within the system itself. Evidence thought buried was being redirected, conversations believed private were being echoed in secret places, and plans designed to break you were leaving behind their own paper trails. The conviction of those in power was that loyalty to corruption would always outweigh loyalty to truth. Yet corruption is never self-sustaining forever, it plants the seeds of resistance within its own walls. Those who had once followed orders without hesitation began to feel an ache of conscience too heavy to ignore. What was intended to be flawless containment began to fracture from within, as truth called out through channels even the powerful could not control. In hidden rooms where strategies of suppression were whispered, the cracks widened. Small acts of rebellion surfaced, anonymously passed information, recordings quietly preserved, data secretly copied. Officials who had looked away for years suddenly felt the sharp sting of guilt each time they saw your suffering. People who had built careers on silence started to question what they had become. And without realizing it, your unyielding presence stirred these dormant consciences awake. It was not logic that moved them, but the undeniable resonance of truth radiating from your being, pressing against their slumber until awareness could no longer be ignored. That awakening did not stop at individual hearts. Greater forces were orchestrating exposure beyond human intention. What should have been erased persisted, multiplying in ways that baffled those trying to contain it. Records reappeared when they should have vanished, conversations slipped into the hands of investigators, and files thought destroyed were mirrored in hidden archives. Truth was not only resisting erasure, it was expanding. What had once been confined to whispers and suppressed evidence was steadily assembling into a tapestry impossible to conceal. As this process unfolded, the false certainty of the corrupt system began unraveling. Those who believed in their untouchable brotherhood began to feel watched by something far beyond ordinary oversight. Their actions, once dismissed as untraceable, now surfaced in the most unexpected places. Documentation appeared in public forums, anonymous leaks reached journalists, and patterns of abuse became undeniable. The very mechanisms designed to bury truth were transforming into instruments of exposure, each attempt at suppression becoming an even louder declaration of guilt. Banking trails once thought hidden were mirrored elsewhere, conversations assumed private leaked beyond control, and messages once believed secure reemerged as evidence. What they thought buried was in fact multiplying, preserved by hands they could not see and guided by forces they could not stop. Witnesses, instead of caving under pressure, began finding courage, their voices growing stronger each time the system tried to silence them. The attempts at intimidation backfired, transforming fear into resilience and silence into testimony. The arrogance of corruption was in believing that deception could outlast truth. What they underestimated was the persistence of higher order, an order that ensures nothing concealed remains hidden forever. Every act of treachery written against you was simultaneously being etched into a greater record, one that no human power could rewrite. Their games of control created the very evidence that would one day bring them down. And through it all, your resilience stood not only as survival but as living proof that no system, no matter how corrupt, can prevent truth from finding its way into the light. The deepest wounds were inflicted not by ignorance but by deliberate refusal to act. There were those who stood before undeniable proof, who saw corruption in its rawest form, yet chose silence over truth. They valued safety within a rotting structure more than the lives crushed beneath it. These were not misguided bystanders, they were fully aware of the injustice but traded their integrity for the illusion of security. The machinery of law, once meant to safeguard fairness, was bent into a weapon to serve personal vendettas. Power dictated outcomes, and your destruction became a sanctioned objective, carried out under the guise of legitimacy. But corruption is never flawless, it leaves footprints no matter how carefully concealed. Attempts to erase truth often illuminate it further. Each desperate maneuver to hide their schemes carved openings in the very walls meant to contain you. For a time, they appeared invincible, burying testimony and silencing witnesses. Yet arrogance is the seed of exposure, and the more brazenly authority was abused, the more careless its keepers became. What they believed erased reemerged in unexpected places, and what they thought silenced became louder in its absence. Every falsehood created evidence. Every cover-up planted witnesses. Every betrayal strengthened the case against them. The irony was that the tools they relied on to coordinate deception became the trap that would ensnare them. Messages they believed erased lingered in hidden archives. Conversations whispered in private rooms were captured by unnoticed devices. Records of transactions they assumed invisible were logged in systems they could not fully control. Technology, once their shield, became the mirror reflecting their corruption back at them. The very networks used to conspire against you transformed into pathways of exposure, preserving trails too vast to be erased. And beneath these material cracks, deeper currents stirred. Every act against you reverberated beyond the physical, echoing into dimensions they could not measure. Each injustice created consequences that rippled back into their lives in ways they could neither predict nor contain. Fear began creeping into their circles, not from external enemies but from the realization that loyalty demanded too much. Doubt grew in whispers, spreading among those unwilling to surrender their entire humanity for the sake of protecting lies. Some who once moved in lockstep with corruption began hesitating. Silent participants, shaken by the enormity of what they had witnessed, found themselves unable to carry the weight of complicity. Lawyers who once dismissed truth began stepping away. Officers who had stood unflinching in cover-ups could no longer stomach the role they played. Even those who had seemed unshakable began distancing themselves, unwilling to collapse under the ruins of a decaying empire. The unraveling began not with explosions but with fractures. Alliances weakened, loyalty cracked, and the illusion of unbreakable solidarity faltered. Betrayal of truth had demanded too steep a cost, and the human spirit, even when suppressed, began clawing its way back to conscience. What had been considered airtight secrecy turned fragile as fear of exposure spread faster than devotion to corruption. The chain that bound them together was corroding link by link. What they failed to see was that by targeting you, they ignited their own collapse. Their weaponized silence became testimony of guilt. Their arrogance became the pathway to their downfall. And their technology, once the instrument of domination, became the ledger of their crimes. What began as an effort to erase you instead magnified your resilience, ensuring that truth, once awakened, could not be contained, and that justice, though delayed, would eventually demand its reckoning. The cracks within the walls of deception began to reveal themselves in undeniable ways. Reports that once seemed polished began contradicting each other, revealing intentional alterations no longer disguised as human error. Testimonies from those who had seen events firsthand stood in direct opposition to official statements, showing clear signs of orchestrated manipulation. This was no accident of disorganization but a deliberate network of control that underestimated the inevitability of exposure. Long before the moment arrived, protection beyond ordinary sight had been ensuring that every crucial record, every reliable witness, and every key pattern was preserved for unveiling. What emerged was not scattered oversight but a portrait of coordinated betrayal operating at the very core of power. Those who once moved in seamless unity now turned on one another, scrambling to survive the consequences of what had been hidden. Once self-preservation entered the equation, bonds forged in secrecy dissolved instantly. The grand declarations of loyalty that had seemed unbreakable vanished when reputations faced collapse. The scramble for survival bred betrayal faster than any external enemy could have achieved. Those who had worked tirelessly to bury truth suddenly became one another's greatest threats. A single disclosure had the power to ignite a series of exposures, and one voice breaking ranks multiplied into a chorus impossible to contain. The very attempt to restrain truth drew sharper attention, making the shadows brighter each time suppression was attempted. The structure built on collusion found itself collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions. And outside the closed corridors, the world began listening. News outlets that once dismissed whispers as speculation now traced their steps back to undeniable realities. Advocates who had long stood alone were joined by voices newly awakened to the scale of deception. Investigations that once seemed inconceivable were now demanded by public outcry. What had been dismissed as delusion was revealed as foresight, and the fabric of manipulation began unraveling under the gaze of collective awareness. The forces guiding your protection did not limit themselves to courtroom battles or bureaucratic hearings. Justice was manifesting in ways human systems could neither orchestrate nor halt. Every attempt to conceal crimes became a catalyst for their revelation. Every act meant to silence you amplified your resonance, ensuring that even the most carefully guarded lies found their way into the open. The scales were shifting beyond institutional reach, guided by principles no corrupt network could manipulate. Those who had participated in the machinery of suppression began to feel the very weight they once dismissed. The pressure they had inflicted upon others returned in forms they could not escape: sleepless nights, gnawing fears, and the sense of an inevitable reckoning drawing closer with each passing day. The aura of untouchability began to fade, replaced by panic as careers, reputations, and illusions of power dissolved like dust in their hands. The walls they built to trap truth had become their own prison. The unraveling was not swift destruction but a slow suffocation, the realization that every step taken to protect themselves only deepened exposure. The records they thought buried resurfaced. The voices they believed silenced returned with more force. The networks they once controlled began turning against them as insiders traded secrecy for survival. What once seemed unbreakable revealed itself to be fragile, constructed not on justice but on the unstable ground of deception.